And we're back here at Boom and Bust. I'm your host, Tony Clement, having a conversation with Crystal Witta Vrongo. She is the Director of Research at the Montreal Economic Institute. Crystal, one of the things that we have in sort of continental trade is sometimes it's a lot easier to trade on the north-south axis rather than the whole expanse of Canada. East to west is a long distance versus Ontario trading with Michigan or Ohio, as an example. So, and part of that is transportation costs. Is that something that is kind of retards our ability to have within Canada trade as well?
Absolutely. So that would be in the form of regulatory barriers. So, especially when we're looking at the trucking industry and the logistics with that, uh, between provinces, there are quite different regulations. So, a single load might have to undergo very different things between the provinces, which adds to the time it takes to not only transport that good, but that adds to the cost as well for consumers. And so this isn't something that's been, not not known. It's gaining some traction with the
Mhm.
federal government and with the regulatory and cooperation table of the Canadian Free Trade Agreement, and they've said that they're going to be working towards harmonizing the trucking and regulatory issues surrounding that. So what will come of that? I mean, we're waiting to be seen. But
Right.
the fact that it has been noted and is a priority, that's definitely a plus. But the costs and the time and things like an extra wide load can only be driven on highways in the daytime in one province, but only at nighttime in the other province. And the administrative complexity that a company has to deal with it all adds these layers of costs to the consumer and to the business, which often are passed down to the consumer, that we're really feeling it as Canadians. And because it's slightly invisible, we're not seeing it as readily. But you're right, between provinces or across the country, there's quite a bit more in terms of barriers than if you were just going, directly underneath us to one of the American states.
Right, right. You mentioned wine earlier too. That's been interesting looking at how, with the Trump tariffs, the response of the LCBO in Ontario. I think of the Société d'Alcool Québec in Quebec as well, taking American products off the shelves. But you mentioned at the beginning that it's hard to buy a bottle of Ontario wine in Quebec. So clearly, there is a lot of latitude, though, by the province to allow for products that are distilled or brewed here in Canada to be on the provincial shelves. Do you think that almost like a thin edge of the wedge now that that's been broached with alcohol sales? Do you expect to see more liberalization in the future?
That's a hard one because alcohol is something that each province has very strict exceptions to the Canadian Free Trade Agreement around. Every province seems to want to protect its own liquor and alcohol and spirits industry. And so there's been movement, in smaller ways with between Alberta and British Columbia, for example, with direct to consumer wine shipments and that sort of thing. But it does remain one of the largest barriers that are very explicit and codified within the CFTA itself.
Right.
And it's ridiculous because you're relatively close, PEI in Ontario, for example, or Quebec in Ontario, and to not be able to order that to be shipped to your home, it's irritating when you can easily access other goods that maybe aren't your preferred good, but are what's unfortunately available to you because of things like this.
Right. So maybe in the future we can cross our fingers on that one for sure. Have you been monitoring in the election campaign? Has interprovincial trade barriers come up yet?
Interprovincial trade barriers have been spoken about by both, the two largest political parties, the Liberals and the Conservatives. And so it's definitely an issue that it seems to be on the table kind of across the board, which is
Mhm.
great. And we're definitely monitoring kind of what is said and flagging things and paying attention to what movement actually happens, during or after we actually have an election.
Indeed. Crystal, we're going to take another brief break. We'll be back with you after these messages.